A cry in the forest. The silence of the forest is interrupted by a faint cry. Antonio, an experienced hunter, stops to listen to the sound. Something in the air tells him it's not normal, that the cry shouldn't be there. He stands still for a moment, trying to locate the source of the cry. Something strange begins to settle in his chest. The sound is of a baby, something that seems out of place in the quiet forest. Searching the forest. With his heart racing, Antonio decides to investigate the origin of the cry. He pulls out his rifle and moves cautiously, the ground creaking beneath his boots. As he gets closer, the cry grows louder, filling the air with desperation. The hunter feels an increasing unease, an unknown fear he cannot explain. He knows he must act fast, but he also knows every movement must be calculated. The unexpected discovery. As he passes through a group of trees, he stops abruptly when he sees a terrifying scene. On the ground, covered in leaves, is a baby, so small and fragile it seems to disappear into the vast forest. What freezes his heart is the giant snake coiled around the child. The snake moves slowly, tightening around the baby more and more. Antonio feels a chill run through his body. The snake's threat. The snake seems like an imminent threat. Each movement of the baby provokes a more dangerous reaction from the reptile, which tightens its grip with immense strength. Antonio knows he must act quickly, but any mistake could be fatal. The snake watches him closely, its eyes black as night, seemingly warning him not to try anything. Antonio feels an immense pressure in his chest. Time freezes for a moment. The first attempt to intervene. With trembling hands, Antonio approaches cautiously. His gaze is fixed on the snake, but he knows he can't make a sudden move. He spots a fallen branch nearby and decides to use it to push the reptile away. He touches it carefully, but the snake reacts immediately, tightening its grip on the child. The baby's cry becomes muffled, almost like a lament. Panic starts to overtake Antonio. Remembering his knife. In the midst of the panic, Antonio remembers that he always carries a knife. With precise movements, he pulls it out and opens it, keeping his eyes locked on the snake. The reptile continues to move slowly, as if waiting for the right moment to strike. Antonio takes a deep breath and decides to act. With one hand, he grabs the snake's tail, resisting its strength, and with the other, he begins using the knife. The struggle with the snake. With every cut, the snake seems to resist more, but Antonio doesn't stop. The knife blade starts to pierce the thick skin of the reptile. The snake, although strong, begins to loosen its grip. Antonio feels he has a chance, but the snake writhes violently, demanding more strength from him. With determination, he continues cutting, knowing he must free the baby from the snake at all costs. The snake finally relents. After several attempts, Antonio manages to deliver a deep cut to the snake's body, near the point where it is coiled around the baby. The pressure starts to ease. With one last effort, Antonio is able to uncoil the snake. The reptile, wounded, slithers off into the forest and disappears, leaving only the echo of its movement. Antonio takes the baby into his arms, relieved but also exhausted by the tension. Relief and reflection. Antonio kneels on the ground, holding the baby in his arms. The child continues crying, but he is alive. Antonio feels a mixture of relief and surprise, and as he looks at the baby, he can't help but wonder about what just happened. How is it possible that such a small child was in so much danger? He wonders if someone abandoned him deliberately, leaving him at the mercy of the snake. Tracks on the ground. While Antonio watches the baby, he notices something on the ground. Large, deep tracks that seem to lead away from the area. Something inside him ignites, a mixture of anger and sadness. Who could have left a baby out in the forest? The tracks seem recent, and this discovery makes Antonio question even more about the origin of this child. The return home. Still holding the baby, Antonio begins running back to his home. Every shadow in the forest seems to move, and every noise makes him clutch the child more tightly. The fear doesn't go away, but the need to protect the little one keeps him moving. He runs as if his life depended on it. When he finally reaches his cabin, he bursts through the door and quickly enters, slamming it shut with a sigh of relief. Meeting Elena. Elena, his wife, appears upon hearing the noise. Her face is pale from exhaustion, but her expression changes when she sees the baby in Antonio's arms. Surprised and confused, she asks where the child came from. Antonio, still agitated, explains that he found him in the forest in danger and asks her to care for the baby while he calls for help. Elena, taking the baby, feels an inexplicable connection to him. Elena remembers her lost son. As Elena holds the baby, tears begin to fall from her face. The baby reminds her of the son she lost years ago. Gabriel, her child, had died in an accident when he was just a baby. The emotion overwhelms her as she looks at the little one, and memories of her painful past resurface. She feels deeply moved, but also confused by the bond she feels with the child. Memories of her lost son. Elena vividly recalls what life was like before the tragedy. She remembers Gabriel's birth, the days full of hope, and how everything crumbled in an instant. The death of her son changed her life forever. Now, looking at the baby in her arms, she feels like the past has returned, but with a mix of sadness and hope intertwined. Is this child a sign of something new? The return of the pain. While Antonio dials the emergency number, Elena remains still, holding the baby, lost in her thoughts. The memory of Gabriel hits her again and again, but she also feels a spark of hope as she holds the child. The pain of her loss will never disappear, but for the first time in a long while, she feels like this baby could bring some comfort. The arrival of the ambulance. Soon after, the ambulance arrives with sirens. Elena holds the baby carefully as they take him to the hospital. While the paramedics handle the situation, she looks at Antonio. Despite the tears in her eyes, something has changed in her gaze. A new hope begins to shine in her heart, something she hasn't felt since Gabriel's death. Investigation in the forest. While Elena is at the hospital, Antonio guides the police to the place where he found the baby. They walk among the trees, and Antonio points out the tracks he discovered. Inspector Juarez, a serious man, examines the area and takes notes. The tracks are deep, indicating that a man left them, but nothing more is known. The question still lingers in Antonio's mind. Who could have abandoned a baby in that place? The baby in the hospital. At the hospital, doctors report that, despite being dehydrated and showing signs of hunger, the baby is healthy and strong. Elena watches, cautious but excited, as the baby falls asleep in the crib. Looking at him, she feels a mix of emotions, and although she is afraid of getting too attached, she knows she cannot ignore what she is feeling. A decision about the baby. Antonio and Elena discuss the future of the baby. Although they still know very little about him, Antonio suggests that they should care for him temporarily until the mystery of his origin is resolved. Elena is surprised but knows he is right. This child needs love and protection, and maybe caring for him will help them heal. A new beginning. Finally, the baby is allowed to stay with Antonio and Elena while the police continue their investigation. The mystery of his origin remains unsolved, but the baby has already started changing their lives. Meanwhile, the tracks found in the forest lead to new clues, and although they don't have all the answers, both feel that this child has given them something they thought they had lost: hope.